Can we not have that? Okay. He's doing the mixing. He's mixing. Hi everybody, and thank you for coming to Pen Parenta's December Literary Salon, the holiday mingle. I hope you all mingled. We're going to do mingling more later. One thing that I want you guys to do while you're mingling and avoiding the feedback is at some point take an idea paint marker, which I will pass around or have available to you. Great feedback today. Great feedback, you guys. The one thing that we're going to do is everybody take a marker and write on one of the idea paint walls. Show me an idea, that one maybe. We're going to write our goals for 2020. So you have to come up with a writing goal for 2020. It has to have to be about writing. If you're not a writer, you have to make something up and it'll be funny. If you are a writer, and then you'll be a writer because you will have written something funny. But if you are a writer, like, think about it. Like, what do you want to accomplish in 2020? And write it down. And if you're watching on the internet, put it in the comments. We want, like, accountability. We want to actually get things done. I want to thank LMHQ for the space. It is a beautiful space. It's great. We love Ryan. Thank you, Ryan, for hooking up us and for doing all of the things.
Quickly, if you're looking for a wall to write on, just make sure it's a glossy one. Otherwise, we won't be able to erase your goals. LMHQ guests.
Somewhere on this wall. And do check in on social media at LMHQ or at Pen Parentis. We would love to know that you're here. And what else? If you are an author or a writer who is published or unpublished, who has kids of any age whatsoever, you are more than welcome to join us at our new meetups. We have so many of them now. We have Friday meetup in Lower Manhattan at the Oculus at 10 to 11, and we have one in Tuesdays at noon at the Brooklyn Public Library outside the cafe. We also are starting up 2 more in 2020. One is going to be, I'm really excited about this one, it's going to be in Orange, New Jersey, and it is at a new writer space that is opening up there. It should start the second week of January, and then there's going to be one at Paragraph in, you're going, right? It's at Paragraph on 14th Street in, what's this place called? Manhattan. And we're also, so for you live casting people, we also have an online meetup where if you are a writer who is a parent, you can join us online. We have a Facebook group called Pen Parentis Behind Closed Doors, and if you write down your goals, you're doing what we're doing in person. So every Friday around noon Eastern Standard Time, we put up a sort of post that just basically invites everybody to post their goals for the week. And then a week later, we ask you, did you meet those goals? So we're actually kind of making people write. It's pretty exciting. And we actually just had a absolutely spectacular article written about us in LitHub, which I highly encourage you all to take a look at. I'm sure there are links on all of our social media everywhere. Because we're really, really proud of it. It's a beautiful article. And it basically tells comprehensively about our salons. It tells about our fellowship, and it talks about our meetups and our mentorship and the rest of our cycle of support for writers that are also parents. So my name is M.M. DeVoe. I run Pen Parentis, and these are our fabulous authors, all of whom happen to be parents and also brilliant authors. So as you see, it is possible. And that's basically our mission, is to change the world. Like, we want everybody to know that just because you have kids doesn't mean that your talent evaporates. You can still do whatever it was that you did before. And you can probably even do it better because, you know, you have to pay for college. So that's enough of me chit-chatting and all. The other thing is, of course, we are a nonprofit, so we really do rely on donations. So if you want to make one, we would love one. And you can do that on our website, or you can write checks, or you can talk to me about joining our board. We are looking now very strongly for particularly financial people, because numbers. So if you're interested in joining an arts board, ours is scrappy and fun and currently all women, and it's really neat. We're learning as we go. There's a lot of bumps, and when I say a lot, you can help us. we will take your help. But it is also very low, what's that called? It's not hard to get into it. It's not hard to do it. We really want the involvement of people who are interested in our mission, and we will work together to make this thing happen. So that is my whole spiel, and yeah, now I'm going to pass it on to Christina Chu, who is our phenomenal curator, and she's going to come over here and introduce some readers. Thank you.
So hello, we're here for a wonderful holiday celebration, and I think the whole idea of Family Matters is so wonderful to do around now, because for some families, yeah, it's so fun to get together and sit with each other and eat together and celebrate together, and for others it's not quite so fun. So I thought it'd be perfect to talk about it now. We have 3 awesome authors. I'm going to start with Huda-Al Marashi. She's here from California, guys. Give her a hand. All right, she's the author of First Comes Marriage, not my so typical American love story. It was out last year, and the Washington Post said it's a charming, funny, heartbreaking memoir of faith, family, and the journey of love. Her work has appeared in the Washington Post, the LA Times, Al Jazeera, Vita Review, Refinery 29, The Rumpus, The Offing, and others. Huda is here. Huda lives with her husband and 3 children, so the fact that she's even here, never mind across kind of thing, is pretty incredible. Her youngest has already decided that her next book, this is so cute, should be called Second Comes Taking Care Of, all about how much she loves taking care of him. So everyone, please welcome Huda-Al Marashi.
Thank you so much for having me. My children, actually 2 of my children were born in New York. My writing journey and my family journey began with one kid who was born in Staten Island and another child who was born in Queens. And that 3rd child, who Christina mentioned, was the one who was born in Cleveland, Ohio, before we made our way back to California. And that 3rd child has been waiting for his chance to sell these books at the top of our neighborhood. I keep saying, like, when are we going to have, like, the book stand? Thinks it's going to be like a lemonade stand. So the chapter I'm going to share with you is called Husband Potential. And this is a memoir, so this is the beginning of my actual story. I cannot remember a time when I didn't think of Heidi Ritha as a potential husband. The day my family first met the Rithas, Mrs. Ritha took one look at me, 6 years old, and my hair in braids, and my baby sister Lena, and said, "MashaAllah, MashaAllah, we don't need to look anymore. We found our pretty girls." At the time, I didn't know that my father and Dr. Ritha had gone to the same medical school in Baghdad. I didn't know that they found each other at an American Academy of Neurology meeting in San Diego, and that Dr. Ritha had invited us to his home for dinner. I didn't know that the Rithas were also Iraqi and Shia, because those were descriptors I still didn't know to apply to myself. All I knew that day was that the Rithas were different in the same way we were different. They spoke Arabic with cha sounds, replacing the ka sounds. They ate rice with stews called barga, and they kept their 5 daily prayers, even though Mrs. Ritha, like Mama, did not cover her hair with the hijab. These were my signs that of the 2 types of boys in the world, those who were possible to marry and those who were impossible, the Ritha boys belonged to the former, the small population of boys from which I'd be allowed to choose a husband. It was a remarkable discovery for the early 1980s. The only
only Arab community in our small seaside Northern California town was a secular social group filled with a mix of Lebanese, Palestinians, Syrians, and a few Iraqis who had immigrated so long ago they spoke more English than Arabic. No one in my parents' small band of friends was quite like the Ridas, whose dialect was still so fresh on their tongues, who knew so many other Iraqi immigrant families in the US, and who matched our family not only in religion and level of devotion, but also in ages and interests. The fathers got along, the mothers got along, the Rida boys played well with my brother Ibrahim, and Lena and I played well with their daughter Jamila. In spite of the 400-mile distance between our northern and southern California homes, our families clung to each other. When the Ridas came to our house, we took day trips to Carmel Beach, Big Sur, and San Francisco. We came back dirty and tired and waited in line for a turn in one of the 2 bathrooms in our small ranch home. When my family stayed with the Ridas, they drove us to Los Angeles County, to their newly founded Islamic Center, and to events with other Iraqi families gradually moving into the area. By the time my little sister Lena was 4 years old, she'd already intuited that the Rida boys were the marriageable kind. After a picnic one sunny afternoon in Big Sur, she turned to Jamila Rida, the oldest child among us, and said, "I'm full. Now can I have my wedding?" Lena had been gripped by wedding fever ever since she'd fallen asleep and missed her chance to be a flower girl in Jamila's aunt's wedding. Jamila had promised Lena she could have a pretend wedding just as soon as everyone was done eating. At home, we baked Lena a cake using a box mix while she put on her favorite summer dress, the one with ruffles and the hula dancer print, and then she stuck a comb with a short tulle veil in her mess of curly blonde hair. Now Jamila brushed the potato chip salt off her fingers, reached out for Lena's hand, and guided her off the bench at the picnic table. Together, we walked down the poison oak-lined trail to the creek where our brothers were building a dam. Jamila climbed to the top of a flat rock, cupped her mouth, and called out, "Guys, come here." I listened to her voice bellow and admired the ease with which she commanded her brothers. Jamila was 13 years old, 4 years older than me, and I believed in her authority. "Guys," Jamila repeated, "we promised." My older brother Ibrahim waded out of the water looking peeved. He hated it when Jamila tried to organize us. Down from the rock, Jamila said, "Ibrahim, you'll do the wedding ceremony." Ibrahim shook his head. His eyes were green and his eyelashes so thick and bold the girls at school teased that he wore mascara. "I'll do it for Lena," he said, "not because you asked me to." "Well," Jamila said, turning to her 2 brothers who were approaching in their swim trunks, "which one of you is going to be the groom?" Without a word, the Rida boys stepped into their sandals, which were left at the side of a nearby rock, and moved in behind Ibrahim. Amjad, the younger and shorter of the 2, was wiry, pure flesh and bones, while Hadi was stockier, with a small tummy and a waist that gave in on both sides to a slight crease. I crouched down so that Lena and I were the same height and said, "You don't need a boy to have a wedding. How about if you get married by yourself?" Lena dropped her chin so low it almost touched her chest and pushed her lips into a frown. "But a bride has to have a husband," she said, with such certainty it was clear that Lena already understood there were rules to getting married. "Just play along," Jamila said to Amjad, but he folded his arms and gave a firm no. She then turned to 12-year-old Hadi. "You'll marry Lena, won't you? She's little. She doesn't understand what being married means. You don't want her to be disappointed, do you?" Hadi stood there with water dripping from his hair and listened to his sister's argument with his hands on his hips. He looked down and kicked the rock closest to his foot. He watched it scuttle across the ground. "Okay," he said. Surely Hadi knew that there would be teasing, that our parents would laugh heartily at the memory of the little bride and her new husband for years to come, and yet he was willing to put up with this for my sister's happiness. From the front of the campground fire pit where I stood as Lena's maid of honor, I watched her walk down the dusty aisle between a run front of benches, clutching a bunch of artificial flowers with one hand, the other hand trying to suppress a giggle. Our mothers looked on from the side, squealing in pure delight at Lena's irrepressible joy, the fluff of golden hair peeking out from behind her veil. Mrs. Riddick called out to her sons, "Pay attention, boys. One day you will dream to marry such pretty girls." When Ibrahim opened his facetious wedding ceremony with "Dearly beloved," with the exception of Jamila, my gaze fell on Hadi, standing at Lena's side, playing along with a sincerity I'd never seen in a boy. I took a snapshot of Hadi in my mind, still in his swim trunks and as tan as a piece of overdone toast. I decided, if I did indeed marry Hadi one day, this would be the moment I'd say I first fell in love with him.
So, I think actually Terese can talk about this too. When it comes to memoir, are there things that you worry about when you write that regarding other people outside of, who are included in your memoir? Like, do you ever worry about that, and do you ever get a reaction?
Oh, absolutely. I wrote this book losing many nights' sleep. I was terrified. I couldn't imagine what my life was going to look like after it came out. But one piece of writing advice that I got very early on here in New York, before my second child was born, I took a one-day memoir writing workshop through Gotham. And it was one of the very first writing classes I ever took. And the one thing that I remembered the guy said was, "Write with the door closed." And I took that so seriously. I did not open the door until I had a book deal, which came close to 10 years later. And I let a very, very, very small group of people in. My siblings knew I was doing this, and my husband, because I was writing about him, and there was no way I would ever submit it and let it get that far without him having seen it and giving me his blessings. And that was all terrifying too. All those conversations were terrifying. All of them I was afraid would end very badly. But I was really worried that after this book came out that I would be disowned or something terrible was going to happen. There would be some terrible fallout.
No? So were your parents obviously a big part of the book? Was that your biggest fear?
It was that my parents were a part of the book, and then I went on to speak very, very frankly about my marriage. And I had come from this kind of conservative family where I wasn't allowed to date, I wasn't allowed to have a boyfriend. I got engaged when I was 18, married when I was 20, and then I sat down and decided that I was going to tell the whole world every little detail of this, including, the biggest part was me when I knew I had written scenes about our wedding night, and I had physical intimacy in there, because I was telling a story about newlyweds, and I was telling a story about marital disappointment, and I thought it was very disingenuous to try to write truthfully and honestly about newlyweds who were virgins and not talk about sex. And that was the part that really gave me nightmares, was imagining my father-in-law reading this. I barfed, anytime that image comes into my head, I dry heave. And I survived. It did happen. He did read it. I cringed. My skin crawled, but I survived. And everybody in my family has surprised me. And that's the one nugget I would leave you with, those of you who are writing true stories, is that people will sometimes surprise you, because the thing that we forget when we are writing stories is that our readers and our family are also humans. And I think reading my story, my relatives, my aunts, my uncles, my dads have forgotten that I was their daughter while they were reading it, and saw themselves in many ways in the story. And people that I didn't expect, these aunts and uncles that I was preparing to be horrified by their reaction, have pulled me aside and whispered, I saw myself in you. And that's been incredible.
Nice. And how old are your kids now?
I have a 17-year-old, a 13-year-old. No, she's turned 14. 17, 14,
Let's delete that
and
part.
8. Yes. And
Wait, 17, 13, 14, and 8?
so 17, 14, and 8. I've got the 13-year-old. And the thing that I think I really would like to drive home with my kids' ages is that and never saw the light of day. Before my 14-year-old was born, that was when I was starting to get closer to the kind of memoir that I knew I wanted to be writing, and I felt like maybe could see the light of day. I started sending it out and realized it was not going to see the light of day because I was getting my nose. And then this draft I wrote under the pressure of wanting to write it before my 8-year-old was born. So 8 years, from having that draft to when this book came out.
And do you have any of your children read it or looked at it or want to read it?
Yeah, so that's a great question too, because I was horrified of my kids reading it, and what I didn't realize was how insignificant and uninteresting I am. And they are not curious, and they're just like, oh, this is Mom's job, this is what she does, and I kind of threw it out there. If you're going to read it, I'd like you to at least be 18, because that's what the age I was when this kind of, the majority of it takes place, and I want you to know what it feels like, to be 18 when you're reading it, but nobody's read it. No one cares yet. And I'm sure they will one day, and I'll probably survive that too.
Okay, so one more question
Yeah.
before we move on. So, I have a son who, because I'm a writer, he kind of shies away from it. He's like, no, I'm math science. He just doesn't want to even go near it. How about your kids? All of you, actually.
I dedicated a book to mine, and they've never read it, and they're 36 and 28. So, good. Okay.
My children are small, they're 6 and 9. They're not aware that I do something beyond them.
And that's where my kids were the majority of the time I was writing this. I never worried about them reading it because I never thought they were going to be old enough to read when it came out. And then it just kept, becoming longer and longer. But I will say some of it's just their nature. Because my oldest loves writing, writes a ton of stories, wants to be a writer. My middle child could go either way. My youngest is like your son. Is all math, all science. He only wants to read nonfiction at the library, only wants to check out nonfiction books at the library, and they have to be about bugs, lizards, and snakes. So that's my son in a nutshell.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to the questions afterwards. I'm going to introduce our next reader, Susan Van Sciver. We're really lucky, actually, to have Susan because we had a last-minute cancellation. Catherine Woodward was supposed to be reading tonight, but she had a death in the family, so she couldn't come. And Susan was kind enough to jump in and be here, and I can't wait to hear her story because it's going to be really good, I can tell. Susan actually lives in the Hudson Valley with her children and an owl, I think, and a dog. I've never had a friend who owned an owl, so I'm kind of like,
It's his nickname.
oh,
It's my child's nickname. I don't reveal their actual names.
oh, man, I took it. Jeez, oh God, I got disappointed. All right, anyway, so she works as a communications coordinator and serves as co-president of her local PTA. Her stories have appeared in several publications, most recently in the Creative Writing Institute's 5th anthology. She's working on a novel set in the South, and hopefully we will hear from her soon about her novel. But for now, she's going to be a short story.
This is kind of funny because I feel like I'm 100% a fiction writer, and I can never write my memoir, and I think it's incredibly brave to those who can do that. And I've written one published piece of creative nonfiction, and that's what I'm choosing to read tonight, because it's the one that relates most to your theme of family matters. And I will just caveat it and say that this was written as a reminder of what life was like before children, and now how I've experienced life after children. It was originally published in an online journal called Snapdragon, and now I'm going to read it for you. It's called Shruti Loves Kit Kats. I remember all the wrong know details about the family next door. I don't remember the parents' names or where they moved from. I don't know why I never invited them into our apartment for tea or coffee or something stronger, especially when things got tough. I remember the charcoal circles around the mother's eyes. I remember the father's childlike smile even when he was suffering. I remember that Aditya was very small for a 4-year-old boy. I remember when 6-year-old Shruti asked for Kit Kats on Halloween, her tea sounded like quick hits to a snare drum. Mark and I were newly married and without children. We worked so much that we were only in the apartment when the sun was down. We didn't know any of our neighbors beyond the New York nod. Quick head tilt implied, "How you doing?" Zero eye contact. In the hallway one day, pungent curry hit my nose, alerting me that our new neighbors might be Indian. We met them the following day, feeling like giants before the family of 4. The mother was as small as a child, and her salt and pepper hair cut short like a boy's. The father was no taller than my shoulder, and the children's bright eyes and teeth stark against their dark skin. One day after the new family had settled, I walked out of the apartment toward the recycling chute with a bag of cans and bottles down the hallway, and I ran into the mother. "Oh, I miss lazy Saturdays," she said. It was late morning, and I was annoyed. Didn't she realize I was doing something productive? Who cares I was still wearing pajama bottoms? I just smiled at her, eager to get back to watching that cooking show that had just gone to commercial break. We had 10 weddings that year to go to, and 9 of them were out of state. So we spent our weekends flying across the country to hand out checks and abuse open bars. One Sunday, we just landed from Tora and Abby's wedding in San Diego, and were waiting in baggage claim at JFK when I saw the family from next door. Shruti's face looked different, round and puffy. We made small talk, and I tried not to stare at the child's swollen face. We were too many people all together to share a cab on the way back, but I offered anyway. That seemed like a grown-up thing to do. Later that week, I rode the elevator up to our 7th-floor apartments with Shruti and her mother. The child's face was still swollen, and her head was bent down reading a book. Once we were off the elevator and came to my apartment door first, I said goodnight to the family as they proceeded down the hall to their door. The mother shuttled Shruti in and quickly came back into the hallway. "It's the steroid she's on that's making her puffy," she explained. I said nothing. "She has a brain tumor." "Oh, I'm so sorry. She's so young." "My son had one too back in India, but he's fine." I could hear the hope in her voice, trying to convince herself that Shruti would also be fine. I wondered what the odds were of having 2 children in one family suffer from the same affliction. Perhaps they'd been exposed to something. Each time I saw Shruti, she was bent over a book, and I saw the thinning process of her long black hair go from full locks to black strings to tanned baldness. I didn't know what to do, so I bought her my favorite books from the Nancy Drew series. I rang the bell and was welcomed in by the nanny or aunt or whoever that other woman was living with them. They offered tea and I declined. I presented the shiny, yellow-coated hardcover books, and Shruti thanked me. Her mother explained that Shruti already liked Nancy Drew. There was a modernized paperback version of the series already on her bookshelf. The mother told me about the math tutoring business she was hoping to start, and I left proud of myself for doing something, happy to know that the mother was focusing on the future. Another lazy Saturday arrived, and Mark and I were contemplating what to do with the day when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find the mother with cash in hand, hopping nervously from one foot to the other. Coupled with her dark eyes, she looked like a rabid raccoon. "Hi, sorry to bother you, but I need to take Shruti to the hospital, and she doesn't have clean underwear. Is there any chance you could get her some?" she asked, handing me a fistful of cash. I wasn't a mother yet, but I understood her desire to solve a problem, any problem. "What kind?" I asked. "Size 6, cotton. There's a Gap on 3rd Avenue. I felt a sense of urgency, and I rushed Mark out the door with me to complete the mission. This was our first time in Gap Kids, and we walked around marveling at the beautiful t-shirts with glitter and unicorns and leggings with rainbow stripes. We wanted to buy it all for Shruti, but we found what we needed and left. And as we walked back, I remember saying aloud to Mark, "I don't think she's ever going to wear them. Just have a bad feeling." And I handed the bag to the nanny/woman that was at the apartment next door. She didn't speak English very well. The only thing she said was hospital. I don't know what we did with the rest of the day, but by late afternoon I was desperate for answers. I wanted Shruti to be on her way home so I could take her to the Gap to pick out something fun. I wanted her to show me her Nancy Drew books, and I wanted to see her old face with her 2 big teeth. We went to our usual Saturday night dinner at the Mexican place around the corner. I sedated myself with pomegranate margaritas and stumbled home with Mark. On the elevator, an Indian woman I had never seen got on. I wanted to see if she knew anything about Shruti, but I didn't want to make assumptions because of her race. When she got off of our floor, the tequila emboldened me. I'm sorry, but you know what's going on with Shruti, I asked. The woman's sagging shoulders told me everything. She's fast. Inside the apartment, I walked into my bedroom and touched the wall I shared with Shruti and sobbed, thinking of all the should-haves. Days later, a slip of paper beneath the door told us a memorial service would be held at Shruti's school. We went and tried to avert our eyes from our classmates, the first graders crying and mourning their friend. I said useless things to the mother and father as they smiled and nodded, and I hugged her bones gently. Months later, I rode up the elevator with the mother and her little boy, who was almost 5 by then, still bright-eyed. She smiled, and I wondered how much effort it took to lift the corners of her mouth, to not fall apart. We walked to our apartments, and in front of my door, she stopped to ask, "You're having a baby, aren't you?" I was 7 weeks pregnant, nowhere close to showing the bone. I hadn't even told my mother. "Yes, I am. How did you know?" I asked. She just smiled and shrugged her shoulders. When it came time to name our baby, I thought back to Shruti and researched the name. It means expert in Vedas, or hearing, revelation. It was a feminine name that we couldn't use on our newborn boy, whom we named Owen, which means little warrior. And we wanted to make sure that our little boy would be prepared for any battles that may lay ahead. We moved to the suburbs, lost touch with the family, and I regret misplacing the sheet of paper with their address. I hate myself for not remembering their names, but I do have a photograph of Shruti, which I look at now and then. She's smiling, face slim, bright white teeth spaced wide. She's wearing a straw hat and looks goofy like she should. On Saturdays, which are no longer lazy, I think of the mother when I watch my boys play. I kiss their heads, thankful they have yet to experience real pain, and on Halloween, we make sure to buy lots of Kit Kats.
So, I was going to ask, when was the moment that you decided that this would be the story? However, it seems like after this, it's kind of the story stayed with you, and then you started to write about it. How long did it take for that to happen and you to start writing?
Well, my oldest is 9, so this happened, almost 10 years ago. I will say one thing I've learned from the writing process is very often I sit down with this idea of what is going to come out and what I'm going to write. And like I said before, I write fiction. This had to come out. And I was surprised. And sometimes I think that's what happens to us.
Why were you surprised?
Because I wanted to write about this fictionalized family I made up in the South. I didn't want to write about this. I didn't want to write about something real. That's why I say I'm in awe of people who can actually write about like the true pain that they've actually lived through.
So what about your book about that's set in the South? Can you tell us a little
Yeah,
about
sure.
it?
So I grew up in the South, in North Carolina specifically, but my parents were Yankees, and so I always just felt like an observer. So I think my whole childhood I've been spending collecting little tidbits, as writers do. And it's not autobiographical in any way, but it is about 2 families who are kind of opposites but get to be close to one another. And sometimes you're enamored with what one family seems to have. But of course that's not what it really is. So that's what the story is about.
So you think you're going to start writing more now that your kids are getting older?
I really, really hope so. Thank you.
So our final reader is Terese Svoboda, and she's read for us before, and we're really lucky to have her back. She's a really great, incredible writer. She's published 18 books of fiction, poetry, and memoir, biography as well, and a
translation from New York. Great American Desert, a book of short stories, appeared in March. Winner of the Guggenheim, a Bob's Prize in Fiction, an Iowa Prize for Poetry, an MEH grant for translation, an O. Henry Award for the short story, the Grewal Film Fiction Prize, 3 NIFA fellowships, and a Pushcart Prize for the essay, a Bellagio residency for the Grotto, and the Jerome Foundation Award in video. She also wrote the libretto for the opera Wet that premiered at LA's Red Cat Theater. Her kids, of course, in protest, write elegant code. Please, everyone, welcome Terese Svoboda.
Yes, I read here before. And behind me, not here, the other location, was a big television screen. And it was the election 2016. So I don't know what I said, and I don't remember anything else. So in the spirit, sort of.
We're rewriting history here.
Yeah. Start over. I made a trip to Canada recently. I became a permanent resident of Canada, kind of in review. And this is a poem about, I'm going to read 2 poems and a short story. This is a poem about meeting someone I haven't seen for 45 years. The alphabet. Tea from a thermos with the languid pour of a place more southern than Americans can imagine. Sudan. She's a widow of a war taken in by Canada, with a voice musical and low with grief. Portraits of graduates line the room, even the children of the second wife, as dead as the husband who was taken and beaten, governor at last released, but falling to the ground, his son putting a phone to his head to talk to her. I was in Egypt in exile, safe. All he said was A, B, C, D, that you repeat during torture, so you reveal nothing, or to bear it without screaming, or remembering how you learned the alphabet under a tree, with the flies thick and the good smell of milk on your hands. A, B, C, she says over the steam. Have a biscuit? I helped her cook long ago, cross-legged on cement, in a soot-black kitchen open to the sky. In the yard, a circle of chairs, with Doherty, the presiding rooster, and Rhett, your husband, pouring him scotch, the scotch of some aid worker wanting some permission. Doherty's speeches rang louder than the others. Rhett tried to hush him, but he went on and on into the absolute black of the African night. The thrill of possible democracy still possible. All right, here's one about kids, sort of. A long swim. In Jamaica, all afternoon, the legless dog dragged itself forward on his front paws, all the engine he had. That ocean had so much salt when he hit the water, it kept his head up, and he could swim in it. Nobody believes me. Dog joy on my brain, I pull down my suit crotch and slither into the pool we rented with this condo in Florida. My chin up, my limbs flailing, I spot a pretty seashell on the opposite edge, its meat hanging out, an accusing red lump some kid left stinking in the sun. I dive, spreading pool water all around, wondering how useful is a shell really until it's empty, not from the shell's point of view. 7 sets of toes lying poolside, where I'd flung enough water off my eyes. 2 men, someone supposed to be sleeping. I never went for a swim in Jamaica. I couldn't leave the baby on the beach, I tell those toes thus lined up, but they tap near where the sun is sinking, so I can't see to grab one of their wrists to ignite a smile on him. They scream at someone else instead, being extracted from the pool against their out of proportion to their size wills. As to wills, my father sits lordly and dry in an overlooking room, conniving a quick trip to the gift shop to wed a woman in a short top. He wishes, but he commands us as audience for his will instead, says my brother. But first, a photo. We line up against foliage which shed water as shadows under us, the wet ones. We smile when told, when shot. We are all wearing t-shirts with my father's brand across it, S with an arrow from its heart, to distinguish our herd. Until this photo of brand documentation is made, planes will be held for family members. No one will be allowed to eat, let alone swim. Pizza is what we say fast, with our eyes closed against encroaching departure times, against pizza lust, against the aforementioned sun. I mean, sun, S-U-N. I have nothing against the sun standing way at the back. Standing so way at the back, he seems short. So tall, he blots out the waning rays. Nothing, except for how he says, everything is my fault. His birth is, but I'm not sorry enough about that to revoke the crazy joy of raising him, the 6 sly notes on the sax after I forbade him to practice. He kisses me goodbye, one peck before the airport taxi opens, and won't call and won't leave a number, because how can you punish a mother any other way? I drip. Will creatures crawl out of their shells at night if I don't appear at his side in the dark of wherever? It's a lot of heave-ho dragging if you have only one leg under your timber, the way I feel about him. Maybe clippers would speed the shell forward, I suggest to the 2 sprites with all their adolescent future before them who tease a crab. They shiver and dance on the cement with it, then vanish as quick as a crab. My father is laying out his tricks when I arrive on his balcony with cards, some of them, a few queens, so female you imagine them banned out of play. I've changed my mind, he says. I'm not giving you any of the money Mom left, but buying another farm like I've always wanted. Let's vote on it, he says, and approve it. Everyone approves it, but me, and my vote is just token. I'm just one will against too many. Now, I want everyone to play charades, he says, collapsing his deck as if found fondling it. My sister, only 58 years old, leaps to the floor and bites her son's ankle. No props, screams my brother, but we all guess it's her vicious old daughter. Then she flings herself into her father's lap, and while he lights up with anything female so close, we guess it's Tom, his doggy replacement for Mom. Hey, this isn't charades, says someone who isn't close family, or not close enough. We just bark. The 2 sprites can't stop barking and lay in their backs pawing the air. Then there is ice cream or dream cheese on a bagel. Then there is dessert on a stick. Rappers find mothers who stick them under cupboards, inside bags, between drawers. Who finds the flashlight? And another, and another. Past all the screened-in rooms and foyers and verandas, we walk in single file. Not petty, says someone in the dark. We walk toward the beach in this flat world of drive. We are walking to the sand that takes up where the boardwalk doesn't, and the rotting sea life gets started. We spin our flashlights everywhere, having heard that turtles crawl onto the beach in the middle of the night, as anxious as we are to leave progeny behind. Who said that, I ask, over the loud laughter of someone play golfing at the egg balls the turtles are said to deposit. Their hearts keep on beating after they're dead, answers someone else. Oh, such optimists, I say, and put my flashlight in my mouth. It lights me, my mouth so wide and red, I'm scary. I could be a beating beating heart. Love, love, love. We stand around ankle deep in the sand, happier, not wiser, declaring the great amphibians clever to go on sexing it up under the water, keeping their eggs stuck in their slots and skipping their scheduled appearance on this beach. We ourselves have all reproduced in cold or hot water or near it, and turn off our flashlights to have our hands free to toast each other in celebration. The thin plastic shells around the drinks making so little sound, we go quiet and gulp. It's instinct, says someone who isn't dreaming. See? Beyond our sandy ankles, a supersized creature drags itself out of the rushing dark water into the dark. So I'm not going to read from this. This is a great book and you should buy it. It's a sci-fi. It's a collection of stories. It starts in the prehistoric times and ends in the far future. And it's about the Midwest. Because nobody writes about the environment in the Midwest, and you know, you'll like it. But along those lines, I'm going to read a poem along the environmental lines, brand new. It's called Thanksgiving Pronouncement. As they leave, 2 by 2 or singly, straggling, the last panda, the not even named insect, you despair. It is Turkey Day, a week after the UN declared biodiversity officially over. You and your brother say we have a decade left. I will be dead, perhaps naturally, whatever that means. But you do nothing. You do not protest, knock on doors, or welcome refugees, or count the last few birds. Black Friday, the color of your next morning, our next morning, I sign you up for an urban survival class, a go pack, a map, the deer not in headlights, butchered in some sci-fi slaughter. No lunch was skipped in your upbringing, no movie unseen, the few clothes you wanted you wore, even the tux at a hilarious age. All of this, like the inverted V of the few geese left, will be cast off, comfort after comfort, in the shriek of sirens, the water graying with filth, the tick of radiation counting your life in half, the mobs of real want. One branch of the family is pioneer, the other pilgrim. Adversity has shaped our courage. I should have been a bad mother. Let some surprised Jeremiah rise out of your lassitude, coated deep, just needing the jolt of desperation. You know, Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, the one who condemned his people for burning their children as offerings to God, who prophesied the end of Jerusalem. Scholars everywhere study the end as it is unfolding, but no one is holding back the ice. The water is running, cold and clear. The deer stands in the road, staring. What animals are left should board. Mom is what they call out. Mom. So I've got to tell you this. I read this afternoon. The cultural theorist Chian Yage, or something like that, recognizes and names this modern affect as stuplimity, a modern mashup of stupefaction and the sublime, characterized by awe at the scale of the problem on one hand, and a dull concussion and fatigue arising from relentless exposure to its symptoms on the other. That is to say, one is knocked into a state of paralysis or pessimistic stupor by the sheer, iterated monstrosity of the situation.
Say the word again.
Oh, I can't really pronounce it. Stuplimity. Thank you.
So, I know that you have older children, but it seems to me you're just so prolific. How do you do it? I mean, are you constantly writing? Do you have ideas of different projects going at the same time?
it's out of failure. When I fail at something, then I go and do something else. And then when I go back and look at what I'm doing, I have learned something, and I can continue. That's pretty much it. So I'm desperate to have several things going on at once.
I just, when you say failure, can you tell me your definition of failure?
It sounds like your definition of failure includes awards.
Oh, like
So yes, well, that's the lucky part. But what it has to do with is when I get to a point in a project where I can't figure out how to go forward in it, I have to put it aside, and instead of sitting around, I do something else. And it always seems like another genre is going to be easier than the one I'm in. That is not true, by the way. But it didn't stop me from thinking that over and over. I've run out of genres now to find my partner.
I'm dying to hear about the opera. You wrote a libretto for an opera. I mean, I get the trend. How do you get there? But literally, how did you? What made you go into opera? Did somebody come to you and say like, "Hey, I need a librettist," or did you say, I've done opera?
Yeah, I did that. I mean, opera, basically, it's like a poet thing. I have another career in making video art, and so I was used to thinking about imagery, moving imagery, and words, and how difficult they are to put together. And so, thinking about an opera where there was action and that was separate from words was an interesting challenge. And there's more musicality involved in that video, so that was challenging.
Did you have a composer? Is this on? Did you have a composer that you were working with, or did you?
No,
find
I
a
wrote
composer?
the libretto, and then I found a composer that I had known for 20 years, and it was a very difficult collaboration.
As they are.
Yes, yes, they're, actually, I wrote the guy collaborating with many people whose work appears at the Met, and he said, actually I emailed him, and he said, we need a phone call for this. And you know what that means.
So, when it comes, since you haven't read anything from that book, I was hoping you would read something. Can you tell us a little bit about it? How you got the idea for it, what it's about?
So I have about 200 published stories, and I just organize them various ways, the way you're supposed to, by chronologically and many different ways. And so I just thought, fuck it. I can't figure it out. And so I put them all in all the ones that seem to be happening in that region together. And when I did that, and then I organized them chronologically from the prehistoric time to the end, to the science fiction end. And I discovered that water was, pretty much a constant through the whole thing, and an environmental aspect. So it seems that over the last 25 years, I've been thinking a lot about water. And my author is called Wet. Also, yes, and it's about the world's water crisis. So no, I didn't set out to write a book of connecting stories. No, it was a gift. I mean, I actually think if you write long enough, you tend to repeat yourself. So that's always a good thing.
Well, when it comes to the environment, are you working on projects that continue this flow?
No, especially. No. I mean, that poem that I read, the last one, is along those lines, but I don't have a big project in that area, no.
What are you working on next?
Well, I was working on a novel which my agent will represent, which is about a multi-ethnic harem in North Africa. And I just finished a story, a book about, called Rich Uncle, which is about a rich uncle. And I have a bunch of things that haven't been published in case anybody would like to look. I don't know. I find it increasingly difficult to write in the age of Trump, actually, just like everyone else.
Yeah. Something that you touched on that I think that people don't realize, especially young, newer writers, is that oftentimes, you might have 200 poems or stories published, but there's like 10 books at home that have not been published.
Yes. Yes, and I have, and like the first story, I wrote, I was with the writers group, and I actually went back recently, I've written 100 short stories before I got into work. Because I was a poet, and poets, they only write in the first person mostly, and they don't know anything about plot or anybody else or what a character is like, they don't get it. And so, it's hard to do, and, but I had a burning desire to tell people how difficult it was to live in the Sudan with a man that was excruciating. I mean, I think you either have to bear a grudge, or you want revenge, or some really serious thing that carries you through 19 years, right?
Dolls revenge, right?
Yeah.
Always works.
Right.
Susan?
Well, I'm working on my first novel. And I think I naively thought, write chapter,
Oh, yeah.
chapter.
That's over.
So now, having worked on it for a couple of years and hearing from wonderful, talented writers like yourself and published authors, I now understand that that's not typically how it works. So knowing that expectation sooner in the process, I'm hoping will be good. And I think if you don't enjoy the process, then it doesn't matter how long it takes you, right? So if it took you 19 years to write your book, but you learned something along the way, and there was a process to it, like maybe the story couldn't have been told sooner because you weren't ready to write it. And I believe it. I think you have to put aside those time frames, that expectation and time frame, and also depending on the avenue that you're taking, knowing that publishing is fickle, right? There's so much beyond your control. So I'm trying every day to tell myself it's all about the process. So check in with me later.
That's all actually a lot of really good advice, because I think it's absolutely true that you do think in the beginning that it's chapter, and you're done. And I have 2 of my chapter manuscripts in a drawer. And you know, at the time when I was getting no's on those manuscripts, I was feeling really sorry for myself. And now I feel really grateful that those things never saw the light of day, and none of you have ever seen them either. And I think when I came back to revise this manuscript, I had several different versions of it that kind of ended up being manuscripts in the drawer because each revision took me so long, and the one that finally brought me to the one that sold took me a year and a half. And it was when I finally learned how to break out of the chapter, and what I realized is, you know, that advice we get about show, don't tell, as I was showing way too much. And that, you know, there wasn't any space in the manuscript where it breathed and things moved quickly because I just told you what was happening. And so that one, you know, shrinking revision where the manuscript was just shrinking and becoming more purposeful took me a really long time. And the piece that you just said about enjoying the process, I think is critical even after you have a book come out, because having a book come out opens all kinds of things in your head too, because you get your foot through one door and then there's a bunch of other closed doors in front of you as well that you didn't know existed before because you were just trying to get yourself through that door. And I think that I have had to keep recalibrating all year long that it is about the process. It is about the growth that I've had this year, the person that I'm becoming in this, what I'm learning about the writing process, who I'm becoming. I think we get so caught up in just trying to get the first book out there, and sometimes we lose sight of after the first book gets out there, there's still that same lesson to be learned again and again and again.
And then there's Carson McCullers, even though both books are like age 19.
Yeah.
Someone like that.
Always.
Yeah.
Did you want to say something about that?
No, I was just gonna say that there's a, is this on?
Yeah.
Okay, so, I was just gonna say there's an art film that's about, composing and painting, which reach also the sort of message of it is that it is the process, but it's called Untitled, and it's made by a woman in New York, and it's a fantastic film. It's hard to find, but worth it if you're ever in a space where you feel like, like, is this art? Am I selling out because I've sold my novel? Like, because I'm selling my stories, does that mean that I'm no longer an artist? Like, all that mess is really well addressed in this movie, but it's always, again, you just return to, it's about the process, what you're doing. I want to do something new. I want to take a short break so that people can finish the Prosecco and write on the walls and talk to each other real quick, because this is the mingle, the holiday mingle. And I really want you to buy the books and get them to sign them. And then we're going to come back and we're going to have really intimate conversation because we're going to turn off the internet. So bye, live cast. It was really nice talking to you. Bye.